great to chat with Julie Lythcott-Haims on the Psychology Podcast. Julie believes in humans and is deeply interested in what gets in our way. She's a former corporate lawyer and Stanford dean. She serves on the board of Common Sense Media and on the advisory board of leanin.org. And she is a former board member at Foundation for a College Education, Global Citizen Year, the Writers Grotto, and Challenge Success. Julie is the New York Times bestselling author of the anti-helicopter parenting manifesto, How to Raise an Adult. Her second book is the critically acclaimed and award-winning prose poetry memoir, Real American. And her third book, which is the focus of today's conversation, is Your Turn, How to Be an Adult, which came out in April 2021. Julie, I'm so excited for this highly anticipated interview with you.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it and delighted to be with your listeners.
Thank you so much. What an incredible book this is. How to Be an Adult. You know, I read this because I was curious. Like what? I don't feel like an adult, but I'm old enough to be one. Right. They tell me that I should be an adult already. So how do you define adulting? Yeah, as you call it.
Well, adulting, I pronounce it adulting. Forgive me.
Adulting.
Fine, it's all good. I think adulting is simply the stage of life between childhood and death. A set of decades, we hope, in which we are in charge of ourselves in the context of a world where we absolutely lack control, but we are in charge of our own self, our choices, our decisions, our way forward. And hopefully a set of years that are healthy. So that's what adulting is. It's not a mysterious thing. It is simply the longest stage of life we will be in, bookended by periods of life, childhood, and being quite elderly or sick toward the end of our lives, where we are cared for largely by others. So it's this period where we are in the driver's seat, where we are the decision maker, where what we know to be true about ourselves, the direction in which we want to head, and the things we do is more under our control than it will be at the beginning of life and at the end.
Beautiful. You know, your prior book, which I loved, How to Raise an Adult, really did push back this idea that as parents, we have to do everything for the child. You know, we have to always worry every second, what could happen next and make sure that we swoop in there and make that change. Between writing that book and then today, what has changed in the world, do you think, in terms of, a lot has changed, right? But what do you see as some of the most pressing things that has changed, even how you would think about being an adult back then when you were writing that book?
Well, I think obviously the pandemic has really sharpened the focus for a lot of us about ourselves and about our families, about what matters to us, about our society. And I think it's been an opportunity to clarify, okay, when I'm back out there, when I'm unleashed again, when I feel less fettered by circumstance, what am I going to do? I think I try to live my life listening to the words of poet Mary Oliver, who said, what are you going to do with this? Yeah. What are you going to do with this one wild and precious life? She asked. And I have that question in my head always. And I think having been through over a year now of lockdown in various states of limitation, thanks to a pandemic, many of us are, champing at the bit, ready to be unleashed back out there. But this time, perhaps, if we've done the work, if we have done some good thinking and some good self-examination and some pondering and some dreaming and some planning, maybe we will unleash ourselves and be a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more purposeful about whatever it is that we have decided matters most to us. I think we've all had a reckoning around what matters and what doesn't. And we've all gotten a clear glimpse that life is finite, and that we shouldn't take people for granted. We shouldn't take opportunities for granted. We shouldn't take what we already have in our lives that's going reasonably well for granted. So all of these things that I'm describing are the kinds of conversations I hope adults are having in their own minds about their own lives. And I think you asked what adulting is, and I would say, I think primarily I've defined it as a set of years between childhood and death, but I will add that it's a state of mind. And so this pandemic, I think, has given us that opportunity to really re-examine this state of mind that we have about our own desires, our own fears, our own wants, our needs. And so, yeah, I think it has been an opportunity to be more intentional and deliberate about adulting.
Yeah, that's interesting that you call it a state of mind. A lot of people talk about growth mindset. Is there an adult mindset?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
An adult mindset, and I talk a lot about Carol Dweck's work and
I
growth
know.
mindset in this book as the antidote to perfectionism, which really holds so many of us back as we emerge out of childhood into adulthood. And for many of us, well into adulthood, we are perfectionists and think that's fine, or we learn that it's not fine and we need to cast it off. And hopefully, we all get to this place of it's actually about our effort and trying to learn and grow rather than be perfect all the time. An adult mindset is I can, which is, of course, agency. An adult mindset is I can cope, which is, of course, resilience. An adult mindset is there's more than me in this world. I'm one of 7+ billion, which is at its core a way to have good character, a way to recognize that other people matter and other people have needs. An adult mindset is I'm responsible for myself, and I have to also try to be of use to the others around me, whether they are my family, my children, my colleagues, my neighbors. Adulting is the first time you really have the obligation, I think, to not be that little narcissistic child, not narcissistic in a clinical sense, but a child's world tends to be very self-focused and self-absorbed. But as we emerge into our adult lives, we come to appreciate that, no, there's others around here. I need to pay attention to that. And ultimately that benefits them and it benefits me because we're a social species and we need to be in community and collaboration with one another. And so I think ultimately the adulting mindset is, I'm going to get real clear on who I am and that I'm capable, that I'm strong, that I can bounce back, and that I'll do my work and also take the needs and feelings of the others in my life into account and try to be of use to them.
Well, I love that mindset. A lot of times we get a lot of external pressures and messages of what we're told what it means to be an adult. Sometimes there's this concept that there's a certain right track that you should be on as an adult. You challenge that idea of the right track concept, right?
I do. And frankly, this is the first chapter I wrote that I felt good about. I tried and failed for 3 years to write this book. I had a book contract. My publisher was clear they wanted this book. I had signed a contract, but I couldn't find my way in because I was really struggling with whether I had any authority to write a book on adulting. And then I came to accept no one is an authority on adulting. If you're an adult, you're an authority, no more or less than anybody else. You're doing it by definition. So this chapter, which happens to be the first chapter I wrote, is chapter 5 out of 13 in the book. It's called Stop Pleasing Others. They have no idea who you are. And that's the chapter heading. And I think it is emblematic of the book, which speaks very bluntly, very frankly, very declaratively, but also compassionately to the reader. And I summoned my former Stanford dean voice in writing this book, picturing myself sitting with a young person who is struggling with the right track concept and struggling with the pressure they feel to please others. And this chapter is both about work, career, and your personal life, your identity, who you choose to be in community with, who you choose to love. In both of these realms, the professional and the personal, there's this sense that there's a right way and a wrong way. And certainly with career, we call it right track. And Scott, there is no right track. First of all, adulting does come, right?
What a relief.
There's no track, there's no path, but so many young people have been raised in a childhood that definitely had a track. There was a track to the right school. There was a track through the right math classes, a track to the right college. Then when you're in college, you think there are only 5 acceptable majors. And in this book, I am shaking those assumptions at their foundation. People who think there are only 5 acceptable majors or careers or jobs are so limited. I feel badly for them. There's this vast, wide open landscape of possibility if we're at least middle class. I mean, I realize if you're working class, if you're poor, there are a significant set of limitations that may impede your forward progress. And yet, even so, a good mentor, a decent education can get you out of difficult circumstances and to a place of opportunity. And when you are there, you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be an investment banker to have a rich and rewarding, wonderful life. There are just an infinite set of things. And it is up to nobody to tell you what the right way forward for you is. So this chapter ultimately that totally assaults the concept of right track, ultimately asks the reader, listen to your inner voice, figure out who you are. Why are you here on this planet? What do you know to be true about yourself? Forget everybody else. What are you good at? What do you know you are good at? What do you love? Can you find work that is at the intersection of those things? You got to be good at it to make your way in that career. You got to love it in order to feel satisfaction. If you're just good at it but don't love it, you'll feel like a drone in your own life. If you just love it and you're not good at it, you probably won't get very far. So this sweet spot around work is, are you good at it and do you love it? If so, go and ignore everybody else who doesn't get it, who doesn't accept it, who criticizes you, etc. It is not up to your parents. It's not up to your grandparents. It's not up to your whole ethnic community, your friend group to decide or validate what you choose to do for your work. This is a deeply personal knowing. And I'm trying to entice readers to listen for that deep knowing within themselves that tells them what is the right track for me, not let me adhere to someone else's or society's conception of the right track.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to announce that Athletic Greens is a sponsor of this podcast. Athletic Greens is the most comprehensive daily nutritional beverage I've ever tried. I've been using their product religiously for the past 7 years or so, and it consistently makes me feel healthier and more energized throughout the day. I can't recommend this product enough. It's incredible how much it lifts my mood. I treat drinking Athletic Greens like a ritual, waking up in the morning and taking it to start my day off right. It has replaced my multivitamins and it tastes really good. Look, with so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients it needs to thrive. There's so many things we do throughout the day that can leave us deficient in key nutrients. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. Their daily all-in-one superpower food is the easiest and most delicious nutritional habit that you could add to your daily routine and empower you towards better habits. One tasty scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sources ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more that all work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid with digestion, and supporting a healthy immune system, all without the need to take multiple products or pills. Athletic Greens is continually improving their formula based on the latest research, and they go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional formula on the planet. This product is also lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and it contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. And right now, Athletic Greens is doubling down on supporting your immune system during the winter months. They're offering my audience a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase if you visit my link today. This is a really great deal, especially considering that a lot of health experts are noting the importance of vitamin D and its direct impact supporting the immune system, especially during colder months where there's less sun exposure. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/psychology and join health experts, athletes, and health-conscious go-getters around the world who make a daily commitment to their health every day. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/psychology and get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. Okay, now back to the show. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And this is, we're very aligned on this, as someone who tries to help people self-actualize in their own direction. As Abraham Maslow said, we try to make a rose into a good rose, not turn a rose into lilies,
Right.
And so very much aligned. But certainly some professions are more socially acceptable than others, and right. So for some people, it's a lot harder for them to just embrace that they want to go into a certain profession than others. I mean, you hint at this absolutely when you say you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be this or that, But what advice do you have to people who want to go in fields? You want to be a clown in the circus. Let's say someone's like they follow their inner knowing, and their inner knowing tells them, to be a trapeze artist or something. I don't know, whatever kind of things that just are not as socially acceptable. What advice do you have for them? What sort of pep talk?
Well, I think my first thought is if you want to go be a clown or a trapeze artist, go be that person. As long as you can pay your bills and keep yourself healthy and well, it's really nobody else's business what you do for a living. If it's illegal, if it's problematic and violent toward others, don't do that. But outside of that kind of societal judgment, like you really should not be an axe murderer. Who are we? Business do we have telling other people what to do? The second thing I'll say is, we spend so much of our years trying to please our parents or our grandparents. I cite someone in the book who was cut off from her very wealthy family because she chose to attend Stanford University rather than one of the Ivy League schools. And she just stood up to that grandparent and said, I wish you could love and support me for who I am. I'm a designer. They have a design school there. Those back east schools don't have the opportunity to study design. This was back in the 80s. And, she walked away from that. And somebody could say there's a lot of privilege inherent in being able to walk away. But for that young person, it felt pretty consequential to walk away from that family money, from that trust fund, if you will. And she has led the most engaged, fascinating life in work, discovering new ways of making manufacturing operations flow and soar and succeed. And all of that is a function of the degree she got related to design. And and her grandmother may never understand, and so be it. I mean, I think the ultimate message, the pep talk is your life will feel most deeply satisfying, nourishing, delicious to you when you are the trapeze artist, even if you grew up in a family of lawyers. If you want to be the person who takes people whitewater rafting down the Colorado River and your whole family, doesn't get it, that's okay. You're not here to please your family. And I know that's an easy thing for me to say. And I'm not trying to offend anybody culturally. We do owe our families a lot. Often they've provided for us materially in terms of emotional support, but no human has the right to say, you matter to me more if you get a law degree. I love and accept you when you get the MD. Like that's just, that's an insecurity in that person's mind. Whomever's trying to impose their own right career, right track on you is insecure. They need you to be that so they can feel better about themselves. They need to go get some good therapy to deal with that. Meanwhile, I'm here rooting for you to lead the life you want to lead.
I feel so inspired right now.
I'm so glad. Scott, I mean, this relates to career, but it also relates to identity. I mean, how many of us are struggling with what we know to be true about who we are, whether it's around our gender, our sexual orientation, our racial or ethnic identities. We're struggling to just be that person that we intrinsically, somewhere deep at the level of spirit, soul, just self-knowing, we know this is what's right for us. And yet we have a family construct or a community construct that says, nope, we're not that. That's a huge conflict. And I am here rooting for all of us to listen to that, to listen to what is coming up and out of the self, rather than feeling the imperative to conform to society, family, community. My second book, Real American, is on being Black and biracial, growing up in white spaces where I was otherized. I was made to feel like the other. I was called the N-word. I was mistreated on the basis of my skin color, and it harmed me. And I have, therefore, I think, tremendous empathy for anybody who, for whatever reason, has been marginalized in those ways. I'm rooting for all of us to say, no, actually, I'm this, and I love myself as this person, and to hell with the rest of you, because I'm not here to please you. I'm here to make my way in this one wild and precious life.
Yes, yes. I remember a story you told about being a racism incident happened to you in grade school. I don't know if we can talk about it publicly, but with in the locker, right? There was yeah. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, that's the incident I was alluding to.
Okay.
Just now, talking about. I'm at an all-white high school. I'm 17 years old. I'm turning 17. It's my 17th birthday, November of my senior year. My high school is all white, by which I mean 1,200 white kids, 2 Jewish kids who were not considered white, and me, black and biracial me. I have fairly light skin, and yet I was the blackest thing this town had ever seen. When I darkened up in the summer, thanks to the August sun, I had a white person there. Everybody was white. I don't need to say I had a white person do this because everybody was white. I had a person walk past me and just stop in her tracks and say, "Oh my gosh, you're so tan." Like there was nothing in her worldview that said, well, yes, I was darker because of the summer sun. There was nothing. I was so outside the norm there. She didn't have any conception that I might be a person of color, a black person, a person from, a different race. That's how different and weird I was to them. On my 17th birthday, my best friend had made me a beautiful birthday locker sign, as girls tended to do in my high school then. Maybe they still do. A bunch of pieces of paper taped together on this 5-foot tall locker to celebrate my birthday. She had taped the paper together and pasted onto the pages imagery she'd cut out from teen magazines, imagery and words to celebrate me. And it was a beautiful gift. I loved it. And by the late morning, somebody had come by with a thick black marker and written the N-word on my locker sign in some of the empty white space where there wasn't pasted stuff. Wrote that word 3 times, misspelled it, used only 1 G, but I knew what they'd meant. And I didn't tell anybody, Scott, because I was so ashamed that it had happened to me. I didn't want to bring further attention to my blackness by making any kind of fuss. I also wasn't sure that anybody would take it seriously. And I didn't want that to happen either. So I didn't tell a soul until I went back to school at age 44 to do an MFA to try to get better at writing so that maybe I could write a book on the harm of helicopter parenting, which is my first book. I was in a poetry class and I wrote a poem, a very abstract poem told in 7 voices and 7 typefaces about my high school years. And one of those 7 voices was the voice of this stranger who had called me the N-word on my birthday. And that's when I began to open up about it.
Wow. Thank you for being so vulnerable.
Yeah.
I have deep empathy for that. I think that my own analog to that would be the R word, as a kid in special ed, being called the R word.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My goodness. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's it stays with you, doesn't it? It
does.
Yeah.
But you know what? Let's talk about that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wonder if you've had an experience along the lines of mine. I hid. I was so ashamed. I didn't tell. But the taunt burrowed itself into my psyche and just sat there or grew for 3 decades, or 2.5 decades. And when I finally told myself that it had happened, when I grabbed that memory up from where it was lurking or hiding, festering, within me, when I summoned it back up to my conscious brain and said, this happened, and I began writing about it. And I wrote that poem and began to write other poems related to my experiences with race, and then ultimately wrote a memoir where that story sits alongside, many, many others. I found that I have released the pain of it. The pain of it is now gone from me. It's no longer living in my body or in my mind.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about a really cool podcast, the Addy Hour podcast. As we all know, this past year has been really difficult, from lockdowns to social isolation, to racial injustice, to political turmoil, to lost lives and lost jobs. We're all craving a major dose of life satisfaction, connection, and emotional health. The Addy Hour podcast explores the topics and questions you've been thinking about and creates a unique space to talk about them. Dr. Nee Addy, Yale professor and researcher, man of faith, sports and hip-hop fan, and mental health advocate, and his guests explore a holistic approach to mental health today. Too often one-dimensional or dismissive approaches to mental health and emotional wellness prevent people from getting the help they need. The Addy Hour podcast focuses on the intersection of brain science, mental health, faith, culture, and social justice through dynamic conversations with community leaders, scientists and researchers, professional athletes and entertainers, faith leaders, mental health experts, and advocates. You can listen to the Addy Hour podcast today on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Okay, now back to the show. So let me ask you a question. Would you say that you're no longer a victim of that situation?
I never used the word victim, so I need to, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yes, I will say that I have been, the way that I describe it is that experience had me in its grip.
Uh-huh.
That experience was like a vice grip clamped on my heart or on my sense of self. Wherever those things live in a bodily sense. And when I turned around and faced it, I just dared to stare at it and call it what it was. The vice grip began to loosen. It was almost like when a bully is chasing you and you turn around and you face the bully and you call it what it is. Often it runs away, a bully in the form of a human. So yeah, I am no longer victimized. I am no longer traumatized. I am no longer ashamed. I am free of that. Yes, it happened. It's a part of my past, but it no longer dictates how I feel about myself.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful. Thanks again. I mean, I recognize it's not always easy to bring up these kind of memories and things. So just thank you so much.
No, I'm happy to talk about it. And I appreciate that you shared that you were called the R word. I'm sorry that happened to you. And it speaks to the different time we're in, Scott. Mm-hmm. When you were growing up, you're younger than me. When I was growing up, people routinely said the cruelest things to one another. We have definitely become, some will say it's political correctness, but I prefer to say we've learned not to be assholes to one another. We've learned that it's deeply harmful to be cruel towards somebody, period. Particularly so on the basis of some kind of perceived identity or actual identity or way of being. And this is something else I write about in Your Turn. I'm in Your Turn, I'm normalizing that we've all got something. We have conditions, diagnoses. Maybe we don't have a diagnosis for what we've got, but it's a thing that we contend with. It's a situation. And in my book, I'm not like asterisk in case you have, depression, read page 309. I am normalizing the fact that in our human community, we struggle and contend with various things that comprise the beauty of who we are. And so this book is deliberately inclusive in that sense of people who have been labeled and people who have been made to feel like they're not good enough or that there's something wrong with them. This book, for all young adults struggling with adulting, aims in its narrative to be as inclusive as possible of all, so that every single reader, it is my sincerest hope that every reader, no matter what their background is, and I mean background in every sense of identity, I hope that every reader at some point will get to a page where they say, she was thinking of me when she wrote this. I relate. I therefore feel seen. I therefore feel supported. I therefore feel less alone.
Well, I certainly felt that way reading your book. I certainly felt that way. I could tell you my favorite chapters if you want it.
I'd love to know.
What do you want to know? Do you want me to nerd out with you a second on what really I resonate with? So there's a chapter where you talk about taking good care, and then you have like parentheses of yourself. you
Yeah.
know? And I think that like, it's very easy to forget to do that when when you're kind of like in a healing position, like I'm a coach, I have like so many clients, and then I like just forget like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm allowed to take care of myself. Could you,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about taking good care a little bit? And then I
Sure.
can tell you my next favorite chapter. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is chapter 9, and it's the part of the book where we're really going to go deep into that kind of internal self. After we've talked about your work and your identity and your relationships and your money, now we're in this sort of like, hey, taking care of yourself is essential. It is probably your most important work. You cannot be of use to your clients, to your family, your friends, your loved ones. You cannot be of greatest use to them if you are not nourishing that self. It's that old adage from the airlines, put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. If you aim to be of use to others, you've got to be taking care of yourself. So as with all of my chapters, so this is the chapter where I really go deep around whatever your identities may be, whatever I call them situations. If you have a diagnosis, if you have a challenge, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's cognitive, whatever it might be, like know it, desire to know that self, learn about that self, learn what your self needs in order to thrive. Be continually interested in that. Revisit it regularly, because maybe you're on a set of meds and they're working for you, but maybe you want to be examining, are they still working for me? Is this therapy still the right therapy for me? Is this community still nourishing me in the ways that I want it to, so that I can learn and grow rather than feel stifled or unseen? So this is the chapter that's really putting the mirror up to the reader and inviting the reader to go deep into like, who am I actually, in my bones, in my DNA, in my makeup, and how can I really love that self? Ultimately, this chapter is about self-acceptance and self-love. And then, as with all chapters, I have some personal stuff in there. This book is a genre mashup of memoir, self-help tips, and then these profiles of third parties. And the three profiles I have after this long list of 19 self-care items, which includes everything from breathe to get sleep to get therapy to ask for what you need to have orgasms. It's like everything is in here. The three people at the end are a kid dealing with anxiety and depression. And I say a kid, he's like 21. A woman who's now 29 who dealt with an eating disorder and OCD, and a guy who's in his 40s, a former military guy who's got pretty serious bipolar disorder. And how they cope with these things is so uplifting and so encouraging and inspiring. So, all of these chapters end with stories that I hope inspire readers around what's possible.
Yeah, you have great stories in here. And I mean, how do you find these people?
Yeah. My network, and then my network's network. I did put a survey out on social media about 3 years ago saying, I'm writing this book on adulting, and I really want to hear from people who are struggling with it or who think they are adulting. How do you know you are? I got a lot of responses to that. And some of these interviewees are like Jeff, who's at the end of, he's the guy with bipolar, was a stranger who responded to a survey. I also deliberately crafted quite a diverse set of voices. So I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I don't have any Texans in this book. And you may not think of Texas when you think about, trying to build diversity into your book. But I was like, Texas is the second biggest state. I got to have a Texan in this book. And, I've got vegans in this book, but I also have Black people and Latino people and Asian people and biracial people and white people and Native people and queer people and genderqueer people and trans people and poor people and working class people and very educated and hardly educated and folks, I've really tried to put a broad range of humans in this book, again, for reasons I've already mentioned. And I found some of them came to me because they resonated with something I put out there, and some of them are friends or friends of friends.
Do you have any stories of any like poor white people in the book?
I do actually. The book opens chapter 2, Tag You're It, the terror by offending for yourself. The first guy there, Kyle, is a child who grew up in It's a young man who grew up in Appalachia with a father died young. When he was young, his mother, after a car accident and her husband's death, got addicted to opioids. So this is a story ripped from the headlines. Young got, he's a teenager. He's got a younger sister. He's trying to provide for his family, keep his mom safe and sound, earn money. And, I think that's an incredible story. There's a guy named Levi in Sacramento, a white guy. Both of these are white guys, whose father and mother said, "You're out at 18. His father was not very emotionally available, earned plenty of money, but wouldn't, when the parents got divorced, wouldn't provide child support. Mother was poor, but very loving. And so he grew up, feeling that, money does not make you a better person. My father has money, but boy, he's not there for us. Ultimately he, with his mother's love, gets out of the house to community college. And one of the scenes in his story is of him in his apartment for the first time, where he's lying there in bed the first night he's there saying, wow, I did it. I have my own apartment. I'm paying for it with my salary, with my wages from this job at Napa Auto Parts, and the satisfaction he feels of I'm taking care of business is why he's in that first chapter on the terror and joy of fending for yourself.
I love it. You have such you have such an ability to look deeper to the humanity of each individual. It's remarkable. I don't know if you remember, I retweeted you like maybe a week ago or so. You wrote something beautiful about how you're here for everyone. It's incredible, and even it's a theme throughout your whole book. I mean, even I was gonna say my second favorite chapter, although I'm not like ranking, but another favorite chapter was start talking to strangers. Yeah. You're very good at that. I think that's part of seeing humanity in each and being curious, but even just being curious about the humanity. Like, what do you say to people who aren't there yet? I mean, there are a lot of people who are really suffering so much in our country that they're not, they don't want to look outside of their in-group right now because they're so, their focus is so much on protecting those in their in-group. That next stage where you can open your heart to even people that you've been told are your enemy. What advice do you have there, Julie?
Wow, it's a very big question. If only we could turn our heart outward and be kind to our enemy, we would heal ourselves as a human species and just accelerate to a higher level of group consciousness, I think. And there's a piece of me that believes that's possible, that believes this may be the century in which that happens. There seems to be a collective consciousness growing around that imperative, and I'm here for it. But in the meantime, on this particular Friday, what do we do? This I know. And Scott, I'm not a psychologist, right? Anything that I say that relates to the mind or the psyche, this is what I know intrinsically from my own experiences and observations and what I've read and learned and feel. Mm-hmm. First of all, this us, them that we do is ultimately about fear. Our ancestors who lived, tens of thousands of years ago had to know who was the out group, who was the danger, what's my group, who are we, who's the other, for self-preservation. And we don't need that quite so much anymore, but we still have that hardwired in us. And so we need to start being less afraid of each other, which means we have to learn about each other. They say a passport is an antidote to racism, meaning if you get a passport and you travel to other cultures and communities, you discover, hey, they're humans just like we are. Wow. And we start to feel less afraid, therefore less hateful, more curious, more kind. So, but I think before we can do any of that, we have to be okay within ourselves. A person who doesn't love themselves has a hard time loving and connecting with others. So there is a lot of internal work to be done. I love myself. I know myself. I'm okay. Therefore, I can take a risk, maybe be curious about this other person who looks different than me. But maybe we have something in common. Finding a common interest is a really important way forward before you take on your aunt or uncle, this and that, who completely disagrees with you politically about politics. you do well to open the conversation with something you can both chuckle about, lean into with laughter and love. You're demonstrating, I'm a fellow human just like you. I am trying to create a bridge between us. Maybe we have something difficult to discuss, but first let's remind each other what we have in common.
Yeah. Yeah. Preach, preach.
But I gotta say one other thing, going back to Levi, the Sacramento dude whom I love, because it really knits back to how did I find people for this book and my curiosity and love for humans. Levi was my Lyft driver.
Oh, wow.
We'll talk to Lyft drivers. He rescued us at the side of the road when our car broke down. He was going to drive us to the local car rental outside Sacramento to drive us to Palo Alto. I was going to rent a car. And he was like, you can rent a car or I could just take you in this Lyft the whole way. And I didn't know you could take a 2.5-hour Lyft, but he was like, it's probably going to be the same amount of money. I could use the money and I don't mind the time. And so he and I began chatting. And before I knew it, I was interviewing him for this book because he was this maybe 23-year-old who was just saying everything I wanted readers of my book to hear about how you begin to make your way forward out of childhood toward uncertainty, toward dreams.
I mean, you listen.
I do.
I mean, like your ending story with Sean.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you had a child at that age. I'm gonna have to follow up with you on this one. Right? Yeah.
Yep, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. This dude had interviewed me for his parenting podcast. I loved his philosophy. I loved his ease and comfort in this conversation about parenting. And he sounded young. And here I am, 53. So I said to myself, he sounds like a young dude. And I said, forgive me. I don't mean to come across the wrong way, but I just want to compliment you for how wise you are. I mean, what are you, 31? And he was, 30. And he said, I'm 24. And which meant this baby that he was so lovingly describing, this toddler son of his, was born when Sean was 21. And that's when I said, oh, hey, can I interview you for my book? Because many people will find themselves unexpectedly welcoming a child into their life sooner than they had planned or ever even thought about. And I wanted to put that voice in these pages too.
Yeah, you're very sensitive in the sense that you notice the details about people. It's I'm trying to really get to the essence of what I've observed about you, my limited time getting to know you, but my delicious time getting to know you. I know it's a word we used in your book, and I love that word. I've been overusing that word a lot lately. So, but my delicious time getting to know you. You're very you're very astute, and I think you just notice, like I feel like you notice very subtle things about whether or not if someone's judging you. I feel like you would be very astute at noticing that. If someone's kind of like open, if someone, their own stories, you're very astute. Does this resonate?
Scott, it does. And the way that I appreciate it, first of all, I take those as compliments. I'm grateful that you're seeing me so clearly, or I think you are seeing me clearly. I'll tell you how it feels to me. Because here's what happens. I'm in a conversation outside a pandemic. I'm meeting with somebody one-on-one. It's somebody I'm getting to know better, or it's somebody I know quite well, regardless. We're in person, it's over coffee or what have you. And I'll say something like, so, wow, that must have been really hard for you, whatever it was. And they're like, how do you know?
Yeah.
And I say, I'm just sensing that. And my sensing, Scott, is as clear. It's as clearly, whatever they've given off feels to me like language. I feel they've said, I'm suffering, I'm grieving, I'm afraid, I feel judged, but they haven't been that clear. I've just heard it in the spaces in between the language they did use. I'm also probably paying attention to body language and energy. So I'm often the person who's like, so, let's go deeper into that. Like you and your mom, you really have these issues. And they're like, what? How did you know? And I'm like, so I seem to intuit, or I have a degree of curiosity and empathy. I'm not trying to be obnoxious. I'm not trying to pry. I'm not trying to ask you that thing you don't want to talk about. What happens for me is it is as if they are talking to me about it. And I am just a mirror reflecting back what I feel their being is sharing. And And I love that because I know that when we can connect deeply and vulnerably around the actual shit of our lives, we feel less alone. We feel more connected to this entire human experience. And
Yes.
so I seek those connections. You know, a delicious using that
I
word.
love
Now,
that. I love it.
used word by both of us, but like these human connections are juicy and delicious and nourishing. And I do seek them out. And when I have a day that has contained an interaction like that, I just feel like, woohoo, you know, I got to be with a human today. And wow, it was amazing.
I feel that way right now talking to you.
I'm
Quite
glad.
frankly.
Good.
So what are life's beautiful F words? There's no good way to segue into that.
Exactly. Failure, falling, floundering, fumbling, flailing. 5 or 6 beautiful F words. And I call them the F words because they begin with F and because we avoid them as if we are swearing, you know, like, oh, we can never have that. Like we parents, we humans are so desperately afraid of our kids or ourselves having any setbacks. And yet these setbacks, these things that didn't quite go as we might have hoped or dreamed or planned, these setbacks become our greatest teachers. And so I actually quote Sir Davos from Game of Thrones in this book. I have a lot of pop cultural references in here. And we've got Jon Snow saying, I failed. And Sir Davos saying, good, go out and fail again. You know, that's the point. This is how we learn and grow. We only get stronger and more capable and more confident when we've had that setback that we can learn a little bit from, retool, and we actually strengthen from it. And then we go out and do the next thing. It is almost, I would say, required. So they are life's beautiful F words.
Yeah.
I also like the other F word. I use that a lot in the book. As you know, there are F bombs in this book.
I know. I cursed on Twitter yesterday and it felt so good.
Oh, good for you.
Thank you. If when it's appropriately placed, it feels really good. For emphasis. Well, you know, you just hinted at the point of keep going, you know, which is another major theme in your book. I'd like to end today's interview with a bit of a passage from your book that I think is really touching. You say, it's a rough time to be making your way into adult life. And now it's your turn. You were born for this. You have to do it yourself. You have to want to. You have to learn how. And you have to. Is that what you say? And you have to. Meaning life has to throw you that tag, you're it, wrench. To be, it's not just the question, it's the whole damn point. Thank you so much, Julie, for coming and sharing your beautiful new book. I really highly recommend it for people, and I wish you all the best in your book tour.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. It's been wonderful to be in conversation with you. And thanks to the listeners for spending this time with us. I'm grateful.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology Podcast. If you'd like to react in some way to something you heard, I encourage you to join in on the discussion at thepsychologypodcast.com. That's thepsychologypodcast.com. Thanks for being such a great supporter of the show, and tune in next time for more on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.